A grown man, furniture store owner, bad marriage, worse job, a pirate costume on the sign outside his shop. And somewhere in the walls of that same shop, something is wearing that costume, something that has his face, something that wants him dead. That is the setup for one of the most psychologically loaded monsters in modern horror history. And we are going to break it down today, completely, because if you walk away from the Backrooms movie just thinking Pirate Clark was a cool, scary thing in the third act, you missed almost everything that film was trying to tell you. This is not a monster made to scare you. This is a mirror. And what it reflects is way worse than any jump scare, so before we talk about Pirate Clark, we need to establish something important because this movie has a backstory that is just as fascinating as the film itself. The Backrooms started as a single image, one grainy photograph of an empty, yellow-lit office space. No doors, no windows, no people, just endless fluorescent ceiling tiles and wet carpet that smelled like 1994. That image hit the internet in 2019 and people lost their minds over it, not because it was violent or gory, because it felt wrong in a way that was impossible to describe. Then came Kane Parsons, a teenager, literally a kid making short films on YouTube in his bedroom. He took that concept, built it into a web series, and created some of the most legitimately unsettling found footage content the internet has ever produced. No budget, no studio, just good instincts and a camera. A24 came calling, of course they did. And now we have a theatrical release, directed by a 20-year-old, starring Chiwetel Ejiofor and Renate Reinsve, produced by James Wan, and it opened to over $117 million worldwide, making it A24's biggest opening ever. Let that sit for a moment. A kid who made YouTube videos is now the youngest filmmaker to hit #1 at the box office. That is already a wild story, but the film itself goes even deeper. The Backrooms in this film is not just a location. It is not a haunted house or a monster dimension. Multiple characters in the film describe it as a space built from memories. Fragments of spaces people have lived in, half-remembered rooms, shadows of places that no longer exist. One character calls them echoes, and that word matters. Think about that design choice for a second. The Backrooms in this movie is essentially the inside of someone's head. Not organized, not logical, just an endless maze of half-formed impressions that loop back on themselves and never resolve. If you have ever had a recurring anxiety dream about a place you cannot quite remember, the production design of this film is going to hit you somewhere uncomfortable. Clark, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, is a furniture store owner who was supposed to be an architect. He studied for it, he wanted it. And somewhere along the way, life happened and he ended up selling ottomans in a shop with a pirate mascot on the sign. His therapist, Mary, played by Renate Reinsve, is a woman carrying her own weight. She has a cement handprint from her mother's house that she physically brings with her everywhere she goes. That is not subtle metaphor. That is the film being very direct about what it is doing. These are people who are hauling the past around with them like luggage. And the Backrooms in some way responds to that. Here is what Parsons does really well in this film, and this is the part where you start to understand why Pirate Clark works as well as it does. The movie withholds. From the opening scene, which mirrors the found footage style of the original YouTube series, you know something is in there. Something big, something following the characters. Every hallway corner is wrong. Every door that should lead somewhere leads nowhere. And the thing watching from the edges never fully shows itself. This is classic Jaws filmmaking logic. The monster you imagine is scarier than the monster you see, and Parsons commits to that for almost the entire runtime. Reviewers noted that the film builds a suffocating sense of dread from its very first scene. The production design is so good that the space itself becomes the threat before any creature ever appears. Yellow-tinted rooms, fluorescent hum, the ambient noise of somewhere that should have people in it but does not. It is designed to make your brain register wrongness without giving you anything specific to be afraid of. That slow build is essential, because when Pirate Clark finally appears, the contrast is maximum. You go from undefined dread to something extremely specific and extremely personal, and that shift is where the film's real message lies. Captain Clark's Ottoman Empire. That is the name of Clark's furniture store, and on the sign outside there is a mascot, a pirate, based on Clark himself from an old commercial he filmed for the store. Peg leg, costume, the whole thing. When the monster finally reveals itself in the film's third act, it is wearing that costume. It has Clark's face distorted and wrong in the way the Backrooms gets details wrong. It moves with that peg leg, hobbling through the halls. It cannot speak. But it is enormous and it is violent, and when it finally reaches Clark, it kills him by taking a bite out of his shoulder. Now that moment, a version of you killing you, think about what that actually means. The backrooms as a space is described as something that takes real things and reproduces them incorrectly. It amplifies what is hidden. It pulls out what people keep buried. So when the backrooms creates a version of Clark, it does not create the Clark who shows up to therapy sessions and tries his best. It creates the Clark that exists underneath all of that. The anger, the resentment, the violence he refuses to take responsibility for. His ex-wife left him because of his behavior. He refuses to see that as his fault. Pirate Clark is everything Clark has denied about himself, given a body and let loose. And here's the detail that reviewers keep coming back to. There is a theory in the film that the entity might not be built purely from Clark's own memories of himself. It might be built from how other people remember him. Mary, his employee Kat, her boyfriend Bobby, all of them have memories of Clark. All of them have seen things he has done. And the backrooms may have pulled from all of those impressions simultaneously. That is chilling, because it means Pirate Clark is not just Clark's self-image. It is the sum of what he has done to others, walking around in his own likeness. This is where it gets genuinely interesting from a psychological standpoint. And I want to spend some real time here because this is the layer most casual viewers miss. The film's central theme, stated clearly from the beginning, is trauma. Both leads are dealing with it. Mary carries her mother's handprint. Clark carries a failed marriage, a failed career, and a personality shaped by years of avoiding accountability. There is a psychological concept sometimes described as the shadow. The parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge, the anger you project onto others, the tendencies you rationalize away. You do not get rid of those parts by ignoring them. They go somewhere. They get bigger in the dark. Pirate Clark is a visual representation of exactly that. Clark spent years dressing up his business failures as someone else's fault. He poured his frustration into a job that trapped him. He built walls around his worst instincts and told himself they were not there. And then he walked into a space that shows you what you will not look at, and what he saw was enormous. The film is asking a question that is uncomfortable but honest. What happens to the things inside us that we refuse to confront? Do they just disappear, or do they take on a life of their own? The therapist framing is not accidental either. Mary is literally someone whose job is to help people look at what they avoid, and she is the one who survives. The person trained to face uncomfortable truths is the one who makes it out. The person who spent his whole life running from his own reflection gets consumed by it. That is not a random story choice, that is the whole point. There is another layer here worth pulling apart, and it connects to something real about how trauma actually works. Traumatic memories are not stored the same way regular memories are. They can fragment, they can attach to unrelated things, they can feel present even when the event is long past, and they can distort how we see ourselves and others, sometimes to the point where our self-image becomes almost unrecognizable. The backrooms in this film works the same way. It takes memories and rebuilds them wrong, slightly off, missing details, adding distortions, and the longer you are in there, the less you trust what you see. Pirate Clark is a distorted memory made physical. He looks like Clark, but he is not Clark. He resembles the mascot from the commercial, but the proportions are wrong. He moves like a person, but not quite. He is a trauma response in monster form, the memory of something real filtered through enough pain and denial that it comes out as something that wants to hurt you. The film presents this as horror, but if you spend any time thinking about it, it is also just an accurate description of what unprocessed trauma does to people. It does not go away, it takes a shape, and eventually it starts running things. Let us zoom out for a second and put Backrooms in context. There is a genre developing right now that critics are calling liminal horror. Films and games and stories that use in-between spaces as the source of fear. Empty malls at closing time, long corridors in office buildings after hours, pools nobody is swimming in, stairwells, waiting rooms. These are places that have the shape of somewhere people should be but are empty. That aesthetic exists because it taps into something that is genuinely hard to name. A feeling of wrongness that does not attach to a specific threat. It is pre-verbal. It triggers something in the brain that says this does not compute and keeps saying it. Backrooms built a $117 million film on that feeling. And it did something smart by pairing that aesthetic with real psychological weight. The empty hallways are not just empty hallways. They are the inside of a man who hollowed himself out trying to avoid his own problems. Other films in this space, Skinamarink, I Saw the TV Glow, Exit 8, all of them are circling similar ideas. Liminal spaces as psychological states. The place between who you were and who you are becoming. The unresolved middle of grief and identity. Backrooms is currently the most commercially successful version of that idea. And Pirate Clark is the reason it sticks. Because you can intellectually appreciate an empty yellow hallway. but a towering version of yourself in a pirate costume biting a chunk out of your shoulder is going to stay with you. So what does Pirate Clark actually represent? He is the thing Clark refused to look at. He is the years of blame and resentment and suppressed rage that Clark dumped into the walls of his own life. He is what happens when you treat the people around you like furniture in a store you did not want to run and then refuse to notice you did it. He is, at the end of it, just Clark, with all the filters removed. And the film is smart enough to make that terrifying instead of just sad. Because the honest version of the answer to what we become when we do not deal with our damage is not a gentle metaphor. It is something that hobbles through an infinite hallway wearing a pirate costume, and it does not stop. Kane Parsons made this film at 20 years old. Whatever he makes next, I will be watching closely. If you have seen Backrooms, drop your take in the comments. And if you have not seen it yet, this video should tell you all you need to know about why it is worth your time.